The great council chambers stretched across 3 miles of polished crystal floors, with seats arranged in perfect circles that rose toward the massive dome ceiling. Representatives from 237 different species filled the vast space, their voices creating a constant hum of conversation that echoed off the walls. At the center of it all sat the Council Prime, a towering figure made of what looked like living crystal, his blue light pulsing with each word he spoke. Jake Morrison adjusted his simple black suit and checked his notes one more time. The human delegation sat in Section 12, a modest area that most other species barely noticed. For 30 years, Jake had represented Earth in these chambers, and for 30 years he had watched the same patterns repeat themselves over and over again. The Zilani would make demands, the Corvan Empire would threaten war, the Thrax would buzz angrily about territorial disputes, and somehow the mess would land on humanity's desk to solve. Today was no different. The Zilani ambassador, a tall creature with skin like polished metal, was speaking loudly about trade route violations. His voice carried across the chamber as he pointed his long finger at the Corvan delegation. The Empire has blocked our ships. For 6 months now, he declared. This is an act of war, and we demand immediate action from this council. The Corvan representative, a massive being covered in thick brown fur, stood up with a growl. The Zilani have been smuggling weapons through our space for years. We have every right to inspect their vessels. His deep voice rumbled through the chamber, making several smaller species shift nervously in their seats. Council Prime Veltar raised one crystalline hand for silence. The chair recognizes the human delegation to present their mediation proposal. His tone carried the same dismissive quality it always did when addressing the humans. Jake had grown used to it over the decades, but it still stung every time. Jake stood and walked to the center speaking platform. He moved with quiet confidence, his gray hair catching the light from the dome above. Honorable council members, we propose a neutral inspection protocol. Both Zilani and Corvan officials would be present during all cargo checks, with human observers to ensure fairness. This would address security concerns while maintaining trade freedom. The solution was elegant and practical, like most human proposals. Jake had spent weeks working with Captain Lisa Hayes, the human military liaison, to develop the framework. Lisa sat in the front row of the human section, her uniform crisp and professional. She had fought in 3 different galactic conflicts, always on the side of peace, always trying to protect civilian populations regardless of their species. Dr. Ryan Carter, the chief science advisor, had contributed the technical specifications for the inspection equipment. Ryan sat next to Lisa, his tablet full of detailed plans that could make the whole system work smoothly. He had designed similar protocols for dozens of trade disputes over the years, and they almost always succeeded in keeping the peace. But as Jake finished his presentation, he watched the familiar pattern unfold. The other species whispered among themselves, some nodding thoughtfully, others shaking their heads. Then Council Prime Veltar leaned forward, his blue light dimming slightly. The human proposal shows their typical simplicity, Veltar said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. However, we must consider the wisdom of older civilizations. The Zilani and Corvan have been part of this council for thousands of years. They understand the complexities of galactic politics in ways that humans, with their mere century of space travel, cannot grasp. Jake felt the familiar tightness in his chest. He had heard these words before, in dozens of different forms. The humans were too young, too naive, too simple to understand the real complexities of galactic affairs. Yet somehow their simple solutions worked when the complex ones failed. The Alterian delegate, a being of pure energy contained in a metallic shell, spoke next. Perhaps we should consider the traditional approach. The Corvan Empire has ancient rights to inspect vessels in their space. The Zilani must respect these customs, even if they find them inconvenient. The Thrax representative, an insectoid creature with multiple arms, clicked his mandibles in agreement. The old ways have maintained order for millennia. Why should we change them now for the convenience of younger species? Jake looked around the chamber and saw the same story playing out again. The older species would support each other, the younger ones would fall in line, and the practical solution would be ignored in favor of maintaining traditional power structures. The fact that Jake's proposal could prevent a war that might kill millions seemed less important than preserving the status quo. Lisa caught his eye and gave him a slight nod. She had been watching the political dynamics too, and her expression was grim. After 30 years of this, she was tired of seeing good ideas dismissed because they came from humans. Ryan was already closing his tablet, knowing that his carefully prepared technical specifications would never be implemented. The debate continued for another hour, with various species offering modifications to the traditional inspection rights. Each proposal was more complex than the last, and none of them addressed the core issue that was driving the Zilani and Corvan toward war. Jake listened as they talked in circles, creating elaborate bureaucratic solutions that would take years to implement and probably wouldn't work anyway. Finally, Veltar called for a vote on the modified traditional inspection protocol, which was essentially a complicated way of saying the Corvan could keep doing what they were already doing. The vote passed by a wide margin, with only the human delegation and a few smaller species voting against it. As the session ended, Jake stood slowly and walked back to his seat. He looked at Lisa and Ryan, then at the other members of the human delegation. Communications specialist Amy Foster shook her head sadly. Trade Representative Kevin Martinez was already packing his files, knowing that the Zilani-Corvan conflict would likely explode into full war within months. The chamber began to empty as representatives from various species filed out, chatting among themselves about dinner plans and social events. None of them seemed particularly concerned about the brewing conflict they had just failed to prevent. To them, it was just another day of galactic politics. Jake remained in his seat until the chamber was nearly empty. Then he stood and walked to the central platform one last time. His voice carried clearly in the quiet space as he spoke to the few remaining delegates. "This will be humanity's final participation in council proceedings," he said calmly. "We are formally withdrawing from all galactic affairs, effective immediately. We thank the council for allowing us to serve, and we wish you well in your future endeavors." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Several delegates stopped walking and turned to stare at him. In the entire history of the Galactic Council, no species had ever voluntarily withdrawn from membership. The very concept was unthinkable. Jake collected his papers and walked out of the chamber, followed by the rest of the human delegation. Behind them, the few remaining aliens stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just heard. The humans were leaving, and they were doing it quietly. Without threats or demands or dramatic gestures, they were simply walking away. The evacuation began 3 days after Jake Morrison's announcement. Captain Steve Walker stood on the bridge of the transport vessel Liberty, watching as the last group of human families boarded the ship from New Geneva Colony. The process was methodical and calm, just like everything else about humanity's withdrawal from galactic affairs. No panic, no rushing, no desperate scrambling to pack belongings. Every human seemed to understand that this was the right choice, even if it meant leaving behind homes they had built over decades. Steve had overseen 17 colony evacuations in the past 4 months, and each one followed the same pattern. The humans would spend weeks carefully dismantling their settlements, making sure all equipment was properly maintained and all systems were left in working order. They packed only personal items and essential supplies, leaving behind fully functional cities for whoever might claim them later. It was the most organized withdrawal in galactic history, and it was happening in complete silence. Dr. Amy Foster stood in the medical bay of the research station orbiting Kepler 442b, carefully transferring decades of scientific data to the Alterian team that would be taking over the facility. The Alterians watched in fascination as she explained each system, each protocol, each carefully maintained piece of equipment. They had expected the humans to be bitter about leaving, maybe even to sabotage their work before departing. Instead, Amy was making sure they understood everything perfectly. "This scanner needs to be recalibrated every 48 hours, Amy explained patiently to the lead Alterian scientist. The readings will drift if you don't maintain the temporal synchronization with the planetary magnetic field. Here are the adjustment procedures. She handed over a datapad filled with detailed instructions, written in simple language that any technician could follow. The Alterian scientist, Dr. Yexhai, accepted the pad with obvious confusion. Why are you helping us so thoroughly? No, the council dismissed your research proposals many times. You must feel some resentment toward our species. Amy smiled sadly and continued packing her personal belongings. Science belongs to everyone, not just humans. The research we've done here might help save lives someday. It doesn't matter which species gets the credit, as long as the work continues. Back on New Geneva, the Corvan Empire had already sent advance teams to claim the colony. They arrived expecting to find abandoned ruins or maybe booby traps left by angry humans. Instead, they found pristine cities with all systems running perfectly. The power plants hummed quietly, the water treatment facilities processed fresh supplies, and the agricultural centers continued producing food automatically. It was as if the humans had simply vanished, leaving behind a fully functioning world. Commander Groktile of the Corvan military walked through the empty streets of New Geneva's capital city. His heavy boots echoed off the clean pavement as he examined the buildings, searching for signs of sabotage or damage. He found none. Every structure was in perfect condition, every system operational, every garden carefully tended by automated maintenance robots. This is impossible, he muttered to his aide. No species abandons territory like this. Where are the defensive positions? Where are the hidden weapons? Where are the traps? His aide, a younger Corvan named Bektar, consulted his scanner readings. Sir, there are no military installations at all. The humans appear to have had only basic security systems, and even those have been deactivated and left open for our inspection. The same pattern was repeating itself across dozens of human colonies. The Thrax Collective moved into the trading post that humans had operated for 30 years, expecting to find complex financial systems that would take months to understand. Instead, they found simple, efficient networks that any competent trader could manage within days. The Zalani claimed several research facilities, anticipating that they would need to rebuild everything from scratch. They discovered that the humans had left behind complete documentation for every system. Every experiment, every ongoing project on the moonbase orbiting Proxima Centauri. Engineer Ben Adams was making final checks on the mining equipment before the automated systems took over completely. The Delphini had already sent their team to claim the facility, and Ben was making sure they understood how everything worked. The aquatic beings floated in their mogul tanks, watching as he demonstrated each piece of machinery. The extraction rate is set to sustainable levels, Ben explained, his voice calm and professional. If you increase it beyond these parameters, you'll damage the lunar geology and reduce long-term productivity. The computers will warn you if you try to push too hard, but you can override them if necessary. The lead Delphini, named Rivka, bubbled thoughtfully in her tank. You could have programmed the systems to fail after your departure. Why didn't you? Ben shrugged and continued his demonstration. Because that would hurt innocent people. The materials you extract here will be used to build homes and schools and hospitals. Why would we want to interfere with that? The withdrawals continued for 6 months, with humanity methodically abandoning every outpost, every colony, every research station they had established throughout the galaxy. Captain Lisa Hayes coordinated the military aspects of the evacuation, ensuring that no human weapons or defensive systems fell into the wrong hands. But even this was done carefully, with all equipment properly deactivated and stored according to galactic regulations. The other species watched this process with growing amazement. They had expected anger, threats, maybe even violence from the humans. Instead, they received cooperation, detailed instructions, and facilities that worked better than they had imagined possible. The humans were leaving behind gifts, not scorched earth, but problems began emerging almost immediately. The trade routes that humans had maintained for decades started experiencing issues within weeks of their departure. pirates appeared in sectors that had been peaceful for years. Shipping delays became common as the complex logistics networks that humans had managed began to break down without constant oversight. The Korvanzalani conflict, which Jake Morrison had tried to prevent, exploded into open warfare within 2 months. Without human mediators to find compromise solutions, both sides dug in and began fighting over the disputed trade routes. The war expanded quickly, drawing in smaller species who depended on those shipping lanes for survival. Research stations that Dr. Amy Foster had carefully transferred to other species began reporting equipment failures and data corruption. The Alterians discovered that maintaining the complex systems required constant attention and expertise that they didn't possess. The Thrax found that their insectoid minds, while excellent at certain types of analysis, struggled with the intuitive problem-solving that human scientists had made look effortless. Commander Alex Turner led the final human military withdrawal from the Vega sector. His fleet of 12 ships moved slowly through space, making sure that every human civilian had been safely evacuated before they departed. Alex had served in the Galactic peacekeeping forces for 20 years, and he knew that their departure would create a power vacuum that could lead to chaos. As his ships prepared to enter hyperspace for the journey back to Earth, Alex sent a simple message to the Galactic Council. "We're returning to Earth. We won't be monitoring galactic communications anymore. Good luck." The message was broadcast on all standard frequencies, reaching every major world in the galaxy. It was brief, polite, and final. The humans were keeping their word about complete withdrawal from galactic affairs. The last human ship disappeared into hyperspace on a Tuesday afternoon, Galactic Standard Time. Behind them, they left a galaxy that was about to discover just how much it had depended on the quiet competence of the species they had dismissed as too young and naive to understand the complexities of interstellar civilization. The Council chambers fell silent when the final transmission ended. For the first time in galactic history, an entire species had simply walked away from the great game of interstellar politics. And they had done it with a dignity that left everyone else feeling strangely uncomfortable about what they had lost. The first major system failure happened on a water world called Aquarius Prime, home to the Delphini species. Their underwater cities had thrived for decades using atmospheric processors that engineer Kevin Martinez had designed specifically for their unique environment. The machines were marvels of engineering, capable of extracting breathable gases from seawater and maintaining perfect pressure balances throughout the vast underwater complexes. Dr. Coralfin floated nervously in her laboratory tank as alarms began sounding throughout the city. The atmospheric processors in Sector 7 had begun producing toxic gas instead of clean air, and none of the Delphini technicians could figure out why. They had followed every procedure that Kevin had taught them, checked every system according to his detailed manuals, but something was going wrong. "The readings don't match anything in the human documentation," reported Chief Technician Wavetail, his tentacles twitching with anxiety. "The chemical balance is shifting in ways that shouldn't be possible according to these specifications." Dr. Coralfin studied the data scrolling across her screens. The Delphini had always been excellent at following instructions, but they had never needed to understand the underlying principles of the atmospheric processors. Kevin had made the system so reliable that they had simply assumed they would always work perfectly. Now they were discovering that maintaining complex technology required more than just following written procedures. "Try increasing the catalyst flow by 15%, suggested Wavetail, reading from Kevin's troubleshooting guide. "The manual says this should correct chemical imbalances." They made the adjustment, but the toxic gas levels continued to rise. The processors were following some pattern that wasn't covered in any of the human documentation. Within hours, 3 underwater districts had to be evacuated as the air became unbreathable. The Delphini sent desperate messages to the Galactic Council begging for help, but no other species understood atmospheric processing well enough to offer solutions. Meanwhile, the Korvanzalani War was expanding beyond anyone's expectations. What had started as a trade dispute had grown into a full-scale conflict involving dozens of star systems. The Corvan Empire had claimed several former human colonies, assuming they could use them as forward bases for their military operations. The Zelani had done the same, moving their fleets into positions that human mediators would never have allowed. General Skarthek of the Corvan military stood in the command center of New Geneva, trying to coordinate attacks on Zelani positions. The human colony had seemed like a perfect base of operations, with excellent communication systems and strategic location. But the Corvan officers were discovering that running a complex military campaign required skills that their species had never developed. "The supply lines are failing again," reported his aide, Lieutenant Morkel. "The automated systems that the humans left behind are efficient, but they're not designed for military logistics. We're getting civilian supplies when we need weapons, and food shipments when we need ammunition." Skarthek growled in frustration. The human systems worked perfectly for peaceful colony operations, but they couldn't adapt to the demands of warfare. The Corvan had always solved problems through direct confrontation, but managing a complex military campaign required the kind of careful planning and flexible thinking that humans had excelled at. The Thrax Collective was having similar problems with the trading posts they had claimed. The insectoid species had expected that their mathematical minds would easily understand the financial networks that humans had managed for decades. Instead, they discovered that successful trading required intuitive understanding of dozens of different species' needs and preferences. Hive Queen Zixtra stood in the central trading hub that had once been managed by human merchants. Her compound eyes studied the scrolling data that showed declining trade volumes and increasing customer complaints. The Thrax had tried to optimize the trading algorithms using pure mathematical logic, but somehow their improvements were making things worse. "The Alterian merchants are refusing to trade with us," reported worker drone Clixer. "They say our pricing models are too rigid and don't account for cultural preferences. The Zelani have canceled 3 major contracts because we couldn't accommodate their religious shipping restrictions." Zixtra clicked her mandibles in annoyance. The human traders had somehow managed to balance hundreds of different cultural requirements while maintaining profitable operations. The Thrax had assumed this was simply a matter of mathematical optimization, but they were learning that successful commerce required understanding psychology and culture. Not just numbers, the situation was becoming critical throughout the galaxy. The Alterian Council called emergency sessions twice a week, but without human mediators, every meeting devolved into arguments and threats. Council Prime Veltar found himself spending more time breaking up fights between delegates than discussing actual policy. "The Corvan representative has walked out again," reported his aide, Secretary Nolvan. "He says the Zelani are using the council chambers to spread propaganda about the war. The Thrax are threatening to stop all trade with both species unless they reach a ceasefire." Veltar-S crystalline form pulsed with dim blue light as he considered the situation. When humans had been present, they would have found some way to get all parties talking constructively. They had possessed an almost supernatural ability to find common ground between species that seemed to have nothing in common. Now that they were gone, the Council was discovering that keeping hundreds of different species cooperating was nearly impossible. The first species to openly admit they needed help were the Galfini. Their underwater cities were facing complete atmospheric collapse, and they had no choice but to swallow their pride. Ambassador Rivka sent a formal message to the Council, asking if anyone knew how to contact the humans. "We require immediate assistance with atmospheric processing systems," the message read. "Our cities are becoming uninhabitable, and we do not possess the technical expertise to resolve the crisis. We formally request that the Council attempt to contact the human engineers who designed our life support systems." The message caused a stir throughout the galactic community. For the first time since the humans had departed, a major species was publicly admitting that they couldn't manage without human help. Other species began quietly reviewing their own situations, wondering if they might face similar crises. The Zelani ambassador Krent H. privately contacted several other species representatives, including some from the Alterian Council. His message was carefully worded but carried an unmistakable meaning. The current situation cannot continue. Perhaps our previous decisions regarding the humans require reconsideration. But when the Council attempted to contact Earth, they discovered something troubling. The Sol system wasn't responding to any communications. The humans had said they would no longer monitor galactic transmissions, and apparently they had meant it literally. Every message sent toward Earth disappeared into silence. Dr. HFY, the Alterian scientist who had taken over Amy Foster's research station, made a disturbing discovery while trying to repair a critical piece of equipment. The humans hadn't just left behind documentation for their systems. They had somehow made those systems dependent on constant human oversight in ways that weren't immediately obvious. The quantum resonance calibrator is failing, he reported to his superiors. The human documentation says it should self-adjust, but it's been drifting out of alignment since Dr. Foster departed. I think the systems were designed to respond to human intuition in ways that we don't understand. Similar reports were coming in from dozens of former human facilities. The technology worked perfectly when humans were operating it, but it began developing problems when other species tried to take over. It was as if the machines had been designed to work with human minds in ways that couldn't be easily replicated. The galaxy was learning a harsh lesson about the difference between following instructions and truly understanding how things worked. The humans had made everything look easy, but their departure was revealing just how complex and difficult their jobs had really been. As the 6th month after the human departure passed, the first major government collapsed. The Corvan Empire split into 3 rival factions, each claiming legitimate authority over different territories. The war with the Zolani had drained their resources and exposed deep divisions in their society that human mediators had helped them manage for decades. The galaxy was beginning to understand that they had lost something far more valuable than they had realized. 2 years had passed since the humans disappeared from galactic civilization, and the search for Earth had become desperate. Captain HFY of the Alterian Exploration Fleet commanded a joint task force that included ships from 12 different species, all united in their mission to find the human homeworld. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the first truly cooperative galactic effort in decades was happening only after the humans had left. The search had taken them through 17 star systems where humans had maintained colonies or research stations. Each world they visited told the same strange story. The human settlements were abandoned but perfectly preserved, as if their inhabitants had simply vanished into thin air. The cities were clean, the power systems hummed quietly, and automated maintenance robots continued their work as if nothing had changed. "This is impossible," muttered Dr. Ulinder, the Corvan scientist who had joined the expedition. "No species abandons territory like this. Where are the signs of hasty evacuation? Where are the broken systems and damaged equipment that you'd expect from a rapid departure?" Commander Tolsith, representing the Thrax Collective, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully as he studied the readings from their latest planetary scan. The humans didn't just leave these worlds. They prepared them for our arrival. Look at these maintenance schedules, these automated systems. Everything is designed to function without supervision for decades. The search team had discovered something even more disturbing on their 3rd stop. The human colony on Kepler 186f had been a major research center, home to thousands of scientists and their families. When the search team arrived, they found the laboratory still running experiments, the computers still processing data, and the results still being automatically transmitted to databases that no longer had anyone monitoring them. Dr. Rivka, the Delphini representative, floated in her mobile tank as she examined the abandoned research facility. "The atmospheric processors here are still working perfectly," she reported with obvious frustration. "These are the same models that are failing on our homeworld, but here they run without any problems. It's as if the machines only work properly when humans are nearby." The search team's most significant discovery came on New Geneva, the former human colony that the Corvan Empire had claimed as a military base. While exploring the abandoned civilian sectors, they found a hidden data archive that contained detailed records of every human contribution to galactic civilization over the past 50 years, The archive was massive, containing millions of files, reports, and personal logs that painted a picture of human involvement in galactic affairs that no one had fully understood. Trade agreements that had prevented wars, scientific breakthroughs that had saved entire species, medical protocols that had stopped plagues, and diplomatic solutions that had resolved conflicts before they could escalate. "Look at this," said Dr. Ilinder, his voice filled with amazement as he scrolled through the data. The humans prevented 43 major conflicts in the past decade alone. Most of these situations never even reached the council chambers because human mediators solved them before they became crises. The files revealed the true scope of human activities throughout the galaxy. While the council had seen them as junior partners offering simple solutions to complex problems, the humans had actually been working behind the scenes to maintain the stability of galactic civilization. They had been the glue that held everything together, and their departure was causing everything to fall apart. Captain Zexhide discovered the most shocking revelation in a personal log left by Ambassador Jake Morrison. The entry was dated just 1 week before the humans announced their departure from the council. "We've been keeping detailed records of every intervention, every solution, every crisis we've helped resolve," Jake's recorded voice explained. "Not because we wanted recognition, but because we knew that someday we might need to prove our value to the galaxy. Today I realize that we've been fighting a losing battle. No matter how much we contribute, we'll always be seen as the naive newcomers who don't understand the complexities of galactic politics." The log continued with entries from other human leaders, each expressing the same frustration and disappointment. Dr. Amy Foster had written about her research being dismissed by alien scientists, only to have those same scientists publish her ideas under their own names months later. Captain Lisa Hayes had documented how human peacekeeping efforts were credited to other species in official reports. Engineer Kevin Martinez had described how his technical innovations were called lucky accidents rather than genuine breakthroughs. The humans hadn't left because they were angry or vindictive. They had left because they were tired of being invisible, tired of having their contributions ignored or minimized, tired of being treated like children by species who depended on their help to survive. But the most disturbing discovery came when the search team tried to access the human database systems. Dr. Ilinder, who had some experience with human technology, attempted to log into the main computer network. Instead of finding locked files or error messages, he found something that chilled him to the bone. "The humans erased themselves," he reported to the others, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just their physical presence, but their digital footprint as well. Every reference to human names, human innovations, human contributions to galactic civilization has been systematically removed from our databases." The search team quickly verified this claim by checking their own species records. The effects of human work were everywhere: improved trade routes, better medical protocols, more efficient government systems, but there was no record of who had created these improvements. The humans had somehow reached into every major database in the galaxy and deleted their own history. "It's like they never existed," said Commander Tolsith, his compound eyes reflecting the light from his scanner. "We can see the results of their work, but we can't remember how they did it. We can't even remember their names." The search team found holographic messages on 17 different worlds, all recorded by Chief Engineer Ben Adams. The messages were identical, delivered in his calm, professional voice. "We're going home. We won't be back. Take care of yourselves." The messages had been programmed to activate only after the humans had been gone for 2 years. They were final farewells, left behind like tombstones, marking the end of humanity's involvement in galactic affairs. When the search team finally reached the Sol system, they found Earth's orbital defenses active but unmanned. The automated systems scanned their ships, identified them as non-hostile, but provided no response to their communications. The planet below showed signs of activity, city lights, atmospheric traffic, agricultural areas, but no one answered their calls. "They're there," reported the communications officer, a young Alterian named Kexmar. The planet is clearly inhabited and the orbital stations are functioning normally, but they're not talking to us. Captain HFY tried every diplomatic protocol he knew, broadcasting messages in dozens of languages, offering gifts, promising cooperation, begging for just one conversation. The response was always the same: complete silence. The humans had meant exactly what they said when they announced their departure. They were no longer monitoring galactic communications, no longer interested in galactic affairs, no longer available to solve everyone else's problems. They had gone home, and they had closed the door behind them. The search team spent 3 weeks in the Sol system, trying everything they could think of to establish contact. They sent probes toward Earth, but the orbital defenses gently but firmly redirected them away from the planet. They broadcast historical records showing how much the galaxy needed human help, but received no acknowledgement that anyone was listening. Finally, Captain HFY made the decision that none of them wanted to make. "We're going back," he announced to his crew. "The humans don't want to be found. They've made their choice, and we have to respect it." The search team's return to the galactic core brought news that no one wanted to hear, but everyone needed to know. The humans were alive, they were well, and they were completely uninterested in returning to galactic civilization. They had found peace in isolation, and they weren't coming back to clean up the mess they had left behind. The galaxy was truly on its own now, and the consequences of that realization were about to become much worse. The collapse of galactic civilization accelerated dramatically after the search team returned with news that the humans would not be coming back. Within months of Captain HFY's report, 3 major governments had fallen and dozens of smaller species had retreated to their home systems. The galaxy that had been united under the Council for over 1,000 years was breaking apart like a machine with its most important parts removed. Council. Prime Veltar stood alone in the great chamber that had once hosted representatives from hundreds of worlds. Only 12 species still sent delegates to the regular sessions, and half of those were considering withdrawal. The magnificent crystal dome above his head seemed to mock him with its emptiness, designed to inspire awe in representatives who no longer came to these meetings. "The Thrax Collective has formally suspended all trade agreements," reported Secretary Nolvan, his voice echoing in the vast empty space. "Their hive queens say they cannot maintain profitable operations without human commercial networks. The Zilani have recalled their ambassadors from all Outer Rim systems. The Corvan factions are fighting each other instead of attending council sessions." Veltar's blue light pulsed weakly as he processed this information. The Thrax had been one of the most successful trading species in the galaxy, but their rigid, mathematical approach to commerce had failed completely without human flexibility to balance it. The insectoid species had tried to optimize every transaction for maximum profit, but they couldn't understand why their customers kept canceling contracts and finding other suppliers. The Zilani situation was even worse. Their entire society had been built around exploration and expansion, but they had relied on human-designed navigation systems and diplomatic protocols to maintain peaceful contact with other species. Without those systems, their exploratory missions had turned into disasters. 3 Zilani expeditions had been destroyed by hostile species who misunderstood their intentions, and 2 more had been lost when their navigation computers failed in deep space. But the most devastating collapse was happening to the Corvan Empire. What had once been a proud military federation spanning dozens of star systems had fragmented into 7 different factions, each claiming to be the legitimate government. The civil war that had started as a dispute over succession rights had grown into a galaxy-wide catastrophe. General Breakter stood in the ruins of what had been the Corvan capital city on Corvan Prime. The buildings around him were blackened, shells destroyed by orbital bombardment from rival factions. The Empire's military might, which had seemed so impressive when directed outward against other species, had turned inward with devastating results. "The Fourth Fleet has declared independence," reported his aide, Colonel Vicano. "They've claimed the Vega sector and are demanding recognition as a separate nation. The Seventh Fleet is threatening to attack them if they don't surrender by tomorrow," Breakter growled in frustration. The Corvan military had always been excellent at fighting external enemies, but they had no experience with the kind of internal politics that humans had helped them manage for decades. Every disagreement turned into a fight, every fight escalated into a war, and every war weakened them further. "What about the peace negotiations with the second faction?" he asked, knowing the answer would be bad. "Failed," Vicano replied. Both sides accused each other of treachery and walked out. General Skirthak says he'll only negotiate after the other factions surrender unconditionally. The Corvan had never needed to learn compromise or subtle diplomacy because the humans had always been there to facilitate discussions between different groups. When disputes arose, Ambassador Jake Morrison or one of his colleagues would find some middle ground that everyone could accept. Now the Corvan were discovering that their direct, confrontational approach to problem-solving didn't work when applied to their own internal conflicts. Meanwhile, the smaller species were facing their own crises. The Delphini homeworld was still struggling with atmospheric failures that had claimed 3 major underwater cities. The Alterian research colonies were shutting down one by one as their scientists couldn't maintain the complex equipment that humans had designed. The aquatic singers had lost contact with 2 of their deep space exploration vessels when the navigation systems that Dr. Amy Foster had calibrated began malfunctioning. Dr. Tolwyn, a young Zalani scientist who had worked briefly with Kevin Martinez before the human departure, made a startling discovery while trying to repair a failed atmospheric processor on the Delphini homeworld. She had been studying the human designs for months, trying to understand why the machines worked perfectly when humans operated them but failed when other species took over. "It's not just about following instructions," she reported to the emergency Science Council that had been formed to address the technological crisis. The humans designed these systems to be intuitive rather than rigid. They respond to decision-making patterns that are uniquely human. Her analysis revealed something that the galaxy had never understood about human technology. While other species created machines that followed precise, unchanging protocols, humans had developed systems that could adapt and improvise. Their atmospheric processors didn't just follow programmed responses to environmental changes. They learned from subtle cues and made adjustments based on patterns that were too complex for other species to recognize. "The machines were designed to work with human minds," Tolwyn explained. "They expect operators who can think flexibly, who can recognize problems before they become critical, who can make intuitive adjustments based on incomplete information. We've been trying to operate them like simple computers, but they're actually sophisticated partners that need human-style thinking to function properly." This discovery explained why so many human-designed systems were failing throughout the galaxy. The technology hadn't been sabotaged or deliberately made dependent on human presence. It had simply been created by minds that approached problems differently than any other known species. The humans had made everything look easy because their technology was an extension of their natural way of thinking. The revelation came too late to prevent the continuing collapse. The Thrax Collective had already split into 12 competing hive states, each trying to corner different aspects of the galactic trade that they could no longer manage as a unified species. The Alterian Council had withdrawn from most of their territorial commitments, focusing on protecting their core worlds while their outer colonies were abandoned or fell to local conflicts. Even the search for technological solutions was failing. Dr. Elander, who had led the effort to reverse engineer human systems, announced that his research teams were giving up. "We can copy what the humans built," he reported, "but we can't replicate how they thought. Their technology requires a type of creative problem-solving that our species simply don't possess." The psychological impact of the collapse was as devastating as the practical consequences. Species that had considered themselves advanced and sophisticated were discovering that they had been dependent on the naive humans for their very survival. The pride that had led them to dismiss human contributions was being replaced by desperate humility, but it was too late to matter. The final blow came when the Council's own administrative systems began failing. The massive bureaucracy that governed Galactic civilization had been quietly managed by human efficiency experts for decades. Without their oversight, the paperwork that kept hundreds of species cooperating began to break down. Trade agreements went unprocessed, territorial disputes went unresolved, and diplomatic communications were lost in electronic chaos. Nolvan delivered the news that everyone had been dreading. The Council database has crashed. We've lost access to most administrative records from the past 50 years. The backup systems that the humans maintained are no longer functioning. Council Prime Veltar realized that they had reached the point of no return. The galaxy's greatest civilization was collapsing not because of war or natural disaster, but because they had lost the species that had been quietly holding everything together. The humans had been the invisible foundation that supported galactic society, and their departure had revealed how fragile that society really was. As he stood in the empty council chambers, surrounded by the ruins of 1,000 years of cooperation, Veltar finally understood what they had lost when the humans departed quietly, taking their wisdom with them into voluntary exile. 5 years had passed since humanity's quiet departure, and the galaxy bore no resemblance to the thriving civilization that had once gathered in the great council chambers. The magnificent crystal dome that had inspired awe for 1,000 years now stood cracked and dark, its lights extinguished not by war or disaster but by simple neglect. Council Prime Veltar sat alone among empty seats that had once held representatives from hundreds of worlds, reviewing reports that painted a picture of complete societal collapse. The Thrax collective no longer existed as a unified species. The 12 competing hive states had devolved into constant warfare, fighting over scraps of the trading empire they had once controlled. Queen Zixtra, who had ruled the largest hive, was dead, killed in a conflict over mining rights that would have taken human mediators 30 minutes to resolve. Her successor, Queen Clixara, controlled only a single star system and spent most of her time defending it from attacks by rival hives. The Corvan Empire had become a historical footnote. 7 different factions claimed the title of True Corvan government, but none controlled more than a handful of worlds. The proud military that had once projected power across dozens of star systems had turned its weapons on itself until nothing remained but scattered warlords fighting over ruins. General Breakter had died in the siege of Corvan Prime, and his former territories were now controlled by a dozen different military commanders who changed allegiances weekly. The Zilani had perhaps suffered the worst fate of all. Their explorer fleets, which had been the pride of their civilization, were scattered across the galaxy as refugees. Without human navigation systems and diplomatic protocols, their expeditions had become disasters. 3 entire exploration fleets had been wiped out by hostile species who misunderstood their intentions. The Zilani homeworld now hosted less than half their original population, while the rest lived as refugees on worlds controlled by species that barely tolerated their presence. Dr. Tolwyn, the Zilani scientist who had tried so desperately to understand human technology, sat in her makeshift laboratory on a refugee station orbiting a dying star. Her research equipment was cobbled together from salvaged parts, and her experiments were limited to basic survival technologies. The grand scientific projects that had once advanced galactic knowledge were impossible now, when most species couldn't even maintain the infrastructure that humans had left behind. Another atmospheric processor has failed on the Delphini homeworld. She reported to no one in particular since there was no longer any centralized authority to receive her reports. That makes 17 underwater cities that have been abandoned in the past year. The Delphini population has dropped by 60%. The Delphini crisis had become a slow-motion extinction event. Without Kevin Martinez's expertise, they couldn't maintain the systems that made their underwater civilization possible. City after city had been evacuated as the air became toxic, forcing millions of aquatic beings to crowd into the few remaining safe areas. Many had tried to adapt to surface living, but their biology wasn't suited for it, and the death rate was catastrophic. The Alterian Council had retreated to their core worlds, abandoning most of their territorial holdings and research stations. The energy beings who had once considered themselves The wisest species in the galaxy now spent their time in desperate isolation, trying to maintain the basic systems needed for survival. Their great libraries, which had collected knowledge from thousands of species over millennia, were failing because they couldn't maintain the complex storage systems that human engineers had designed. Secretary Nolvan, now the only remaining administrator in the council chambers, delivered his final report to Veltar. His voice echoed strangely in the vast empty space, emphasizing just how alone they were. The last 3 member species have formally withdrawn from the council. The aquatic singers cite inability to maintain their deep space communication networks. The crystal builders say their architectural projects have become impossible without human engineering support. The plant shepherds report that their agricultural worlds are failing because they can't operate the farming systems that humans designed. Veltar's crystalline form had grown dim over the years, his blue light now barely visible in the darkness of the chamber. The proud leader who had once dismissed human wisdom as naive simplicity was now a broken figure, contemplating the ruins of everything he had helped destroy. "How many worlds have gone dark this month?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would be terrible. 47, Novan replied. "Most lost to equipment failures, some to local conflicts. A few simply abandoned when their populations gave up trying to maintain civilization. The total number of inhabited worlds in the galaxy has dropped from over 3,000 to fewer than 800 in 5 years." The number was staggering. In half a decade, galactic civilization had lost more than 2/3 of its inhabited worlds. Planets that had thrived for centuries were now empty, their populations either dead, scattered as refugees, or retreated to more primitive lifestyles that didn't require the complex technology they could no longer maintain. But the most devastating discovery had come from an unexpected source. A young Alterian clerk named Cursith, working in the ruins of the council archives, had found something that explained the true scope of what they had lost. Hidden in the deepest levels of the database, protected by security protocols that had somehow survived the general system failures, he had discovered the complete record of human contributions to galactic civilization. The humans prevented 2,347 major conflicts in the past century, Cursith reported, his voice filled with amazement and horror. They mediated 16,000 trade disputes, designed life support systems for 43 different species, and created the logistical networks that allowed our civilization to function. They were involved in every major decision, every important project, every crisis that threatened galactic stability. The records revealed that humans hadn't just been helpful members of galactic society, they had been its secret architects. While other species had focused on their own advancement and glory, humans had quietly worked to solve everyone else's problems. They had been the invisible glue that held a diverse galaxy together, and their departure had caused everything to fall apart. The final message came on a Tuesday afternoon, 5 years and 6 months after the humans had announced their departure. It arrived through channels that most species had forgotten existed, broadcast on frequencies that only the oldest communication systems could detect. The message was brief and came from Administrator Kelly Brown, speaking from Earth's orbital stations. "We are aware of the galactic situation," her calm voice said. "We are not interested in resuming contact. Humanity has found peace in isolation. We wish you well in your endeavors." Veltar listened to the message 17 times, hoping to find some hint of willingness to negotiate, some suggestion that the humans might be convinced to return. There was none. The message was polite but final, delivered with the same quiet dignity that had characterized humanity's departure. He composed a response, pouring all his regret and desperation into a plea for forgiveness and help. He explained how the galaxy had collapsed without human guidance, how millions had died, how entire civilizations had fallen. He begged for just one chance to make things right, to show that they had learned from their mistakes. The response came back within hours. Message received and understood. Our position remains unchanged. Good luck. That night, Veltar sat alone in the dark council chambers and finally understood the magnitude of what they had lost. The humans hadn't left because they were angry or vindictive. They had left because they were tired of being taken for granted, tired of having their contributions ignored, tired of being treated as children by species who couldn't survive without them. In their arrogance, the galaxy's elder species had mistaken humanity's humility for weakness, their patience for naivety, and their service for subservience. They had failed to recognize that the youngest species in the galaxy had surpassed them all in the most important ways: in wisdom, in compassion, and in the ability to see beyond their own immediate interests. The final entry in the Council's official records was written by Cursith, the last clerk in a dying bureaucracy. His words would be the epitaph for a civilization that had destroyed itself through pride. The humans departed quietly, taking with them the wisdom we were too proud to acknowledge. In our arrogance, we mistook their humility for weakness, their patience for naivety, and their service for subservience. We have learned too late that sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to walk away. The galaxy has learned a hard lesson. Some gifts, once refused, are never offered again. The lights in the council chambers went out for the final time, and the galaxy entered an age of darkness that would last for generations. Somewhere in the Sol system, humanity continued their quiet existence, having found peace in isolation, while the civilization they had once served crumbled into dust and regret.